You know that specific kind of peace that only exists on a Saturday morning before 10 a.m.? That golden hour where the world feels suspended in a state of grace, where the coffee is still hot, the birds are chirping that generic suburban bliss soundtrack, and the concept of a mortgage payment feels like a distant, abstract problem? That was me. I was living in that moment. I was standing in my driveway, the asphalt already warming up under the June sun, holding the spray nozzle of my garden hose like a scepter of domestic tranquility. I have a 2018 Ford F-150, shadow black. It's my pride and joy. I don't just wash it, I detail it. I treat that truck better than I treat my own liver. I was in the pre-rinse phase, just letting the water cascade over the hood, watching the dust and pollen from the week slide off in satisfying, muddy rivulets. The smell of wet pavement and hose water, that metallic ozone scent, filled the air. It was perfect. I was actually humming. I think it was strict classic rock, maybe a little Creedence Clearwater Revival. Then, the screeching started. It wasn't a car tire. It wasn't a hawk diving for a field mouse. It was a sound that evolution has programmed human males to fear instinctively. A sound that triggers the fight or flight response in the deepest lizard part of the brain. Hey! Hey you! Stop it! Stop it right now! I froze. My thumb slipped off the trigger of the hose nozzle, cutting the stream of water. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of furious flip-flops slapping against concrete. Slap, 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 slap. Rapid fire. I turned slowly. Marching across the property line, which she had marked previously with little orange surveyor flags she bought off Amazon, was Mrs. Higgins. Now, if you live in the suburbs, you know a Mrs. Higgins. Every neighborhood has one. It's a cosmic requirement, like gravity or taxes. She was in her late 60s, wearing a floral bathrobe that looked like a couch from 1984 exploded. And she was wielding a clipboard like a riot shield. Her hair was that specific shade of dyed burgundy that doesn't exist in nature, sprayed into a helmet so rigid it could probably deflect small-caliber fire. She stopped exactly 1 inch from the edge of my driveway, respecting the boundary only because she likely considered my pavement to be contaminated soil. "Good morning, Mrs. Higgins," I said, trying to keep the sigh out of my voice. "Is everything okay?" "Is everything okay?" she mimicked, her voice pitching up an octave. It was like listening to a chainsaw hitting a nail. "No, Jack, everything is not okay. You are doing it again. You are stealing my pressure." I blinked. I looked at the hose in my hand, then back at her. "I'm stealing your pressure?" "Don't play dumb with me." She jabbed a finger at my house. "I have my sprinkler set for 9 o'clock a.m. sharp. 9 a.m. You know this. I have a schedule, Jack. My hydrangeas require specific hydration intervals." "Okay," I said slowly. "And my washing my truck affects that. How?" She let out a huff of exasperation, the kind a physics professor gives a student who just asked if gravity turns off at night. "The city main," she shrieked. "The water main runs from the street, past my house, to your house. When you open that fire hose of yours," she gestured wildly at my standard garden hose, "you create a vacuum in the line. You are physically sucking the water back out of my pipes before it can reach my sprinkler heads. My rotary heads are barely spinning. They're limp, Jack. Limp!" I stared at her. I'm an engineer. I work with fluid dynamics occasionally. I know how city water pressure works. I know that unless I was running an industrial pump capable of draining a reservoir, My garden hose wasn't affecting her pressure by more than a negligible fraction of a PSI. "Mrs. Higgins?" I tried to reason, keeping my voice calm. "That's not really how it works. The city main is 12 inches wide. My hose is half an inch. There's plenty of pressure for both of us. Maybe you have a clog in your—" "Do not mansplain plumbing to me!" she roared. The sheer volume made a crow take flight from the telephone wire above us. "I have logged the times," she continued, looking down at her clipboard. She began reading from a spreadsheet. A literal, handwritten spreadsheet. "May 12th, 9:03 a.m. You showered. My kitchen sink flow reduced by 12%. May 14th, 6:00 p.m. You ran your dishwasher. My toilet took 14 seconds longer to refill. And now today, June 3rd, you are wantonly spraying thousands of gallons onto a truck that is already clean while my prize-winning florals gasp for moisture." She looked up, her eyes wide and manic. "It is theft of utility service, Jack. It is grand larceny of utilities, and I won't stand for it." I took a deep breath. "Mrs. Higgins, I am going to finish washing my truck. If your sprinklers are low, call the water company, but I'm on my property, using water I pay for, from a tap attached to my house." I squeezed the trigger on the nozzle. The water shot out, hitting the wheel well of the truck with a satisfying thwack. "Assault!" she screamed. "He's weaponizing it!" I wasn't even pointing it near her. I was pointing it at my tire. But she scrambled back as if I'd pulled a flamethrower. She whipped a phone out of her bathrobe pocket. An older iPhone with the font size set to maximum, probably, and started recording. "I am documenting this," she narrated to the phone, holding it vertically, of course. "June 3rd, subject is Jack Miller. Subject is engaging in malicious water hoarding and aggressive spraying in a residential zone. Look at the flow rate. Look at the waste." I ignored her. I turned up the radio in my head and focused on the soap suds. I washed the hood. I washed the roof. I washed the tailgate. For 10 minutes she stood there, narrating my every move like a hostility-filled nature documentary. "He is now scrubbing the bumper," she whispered into the phone. "Look at the aggression in the sponge movement. He's mocking me." I was rinsing the soap off the driver's side door when I saw the flashing lights reflect off the wet black paint. I didn't even turn around. I just closed my eyes and whispered a curse word. Of course. She didn't just record, she called the cavalry. I turned off the nozzle and dropped the hose. 2 squad cars. Not 1, but 2. Apparently, grand larceny of utilities sounds serious over the dispatch radio. Officer Miller stepped out of the first car. No relation to me, thank God, though we'd bonded over the last 3 years of him responding to Mrs. Higgins's calls. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had joined the force to fight crime and save lives, only to end up mediating disputes about the exact property line definition of overhanging tree branch. He adjusted his belt, took off his sunglasses, and gave me a look that said, "I'm sorry, man. I really am." "Morning, Jack," Officer Miller said, walking up the driveway. "Morning, officer," I said. "Truck looking good?" "Shiny?" he agreed. He turned to Mrs. Higgins, who was vibrating with vindication. "Mrs. Higgins, dispatch said you reported a theft in progress and an assault with a deadly weapon?" "He is stealing the water pressure." Mrs. Higgins pointed a trembling finger at me. "I explained it to him. The physics, officer, the vacuum effect. He is diverting the city supply for cosmetic automotive vanity while my property suffers drought conditions. That is theft. Arrest him." Officer Miller rubbed his temples. "Ma'am, we've been over this. Buying water from the city and using it is not stealing." "It is when he takes my share," she insisted. "The pipe can only hold so much. It's a zero-sum game. And then, he lunged at me with the sprayer. I have it on video." She shoved her phone into Officer Miller's face. He watched the video for about 5 seconds. He saw me standing there, washing a tire, while she screamed in the background. "Ma'am, Miller said, his patience thinning. "He's washing his truck. He's 15 feet away from you. There's no assault here, and there is no theft. If you're having pressure issues, call a plumber." "I don't need a plumber. I need justice," she snapped. Then her eyes darted down. She saw it, the fatal flaw in my defense. Because I had been washing the truck on the side of the driveway closest to her house, and because gravity is a heartless mistress, the soapy runoff from the rinse was flowing down the asphalt. It reached the edge of my driveway, and there, a small, foamy rivulet, no wider than a pencil, trickled off the concrete and soaked into the strip of grass that marked the border between our properties. Actually, to be precise, it soaked into her grass, maybe 3 square inches of it. Mrs. Higgins gasped. It was a theatrical, sharp intake of breath, like she'd just witnessed a murder. "Look!" she shrieked, pointing at the ground. "Look at that!" We all looked. "The water," she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. "It's crossing the line." "It's soap and water, Mrs. Higgins," I said. "It's harmless." "It is trespassing," she yelled. She looked at Officer Miller. "Officer, look! His fluid is entering my property without my consent. That is dumping. That is illegal discharge of waste materials. He is dumping chemical runoff onto my land." Officer Miller looked at the tiny puddle. He looked at me. He looked at the sky, praying for a meteor to strike right there and end his shift. "Technically," Mrs. Higgins said, her voice turning icy and calm, which was way scarier than the screaming. "Technically, officer, under City Ordinance 44B, Section 9, no homeowner may alter the grade of their land or direct water flow in a manner that negatively impacts adjacent properties. He is directing his wastewater onto my prize lawn. That is property damage. That is trespassing." Officer Miller sighed. "Mrs. Higgins, it's a puddle. It'll dry in 10 minutes. "I want to file a report," she said, crossing her arms. "I want it documented. And I want him cited. If you don't cite him, I will call your sergeant and report you for negligence. I know the code, officer. Unlawful discharge of fluids across property boundaries." Miller winced. He knew she would do it. She had the chief of police on speed dial. She was the kind of woman who wrote letters to the editor of the local paper if a stop sign looked slightly tilted. He turned to me. "Jack," he said quietly, leaning in. "Look, she's technically right about the code. If the water runs off your drive onto her grass, and she makes a stink, it's a code violation. It's stupid, but it's the law." I stared at him. "You have got to be kidding me." "I can write you a warning," Miller said. "Just try to wash the truck on the other side, or put down a towel." Mrs. Higgins heard him. "A warning? A warning?" She stepped forward, her face turning purple. "No, I want a cease and desist. I want a guarantee. Jack Miller, hear me now." She locked eyes with me. It was a glare that could curdle milk. "I want your water kept on your side," she hissed, enunciating every syllable. "I don't want a single drop of your filthy truck wash water, or your roof water, or your sprinkler water touching my property. I want total containment. If I see one more damp spot on my side of the line caused by your negligence, I will sue you for everything you own. I will put a lien on your house so fast your head will spin. Keep your water. To yourself." Something in my brain clicked. It was a soft sound, like a fuse blowing, but instead of the lights going out, a very bright, very red emergency light turned on. I looked at the tiny stream of water touching her grass. Then I looked at the topography of my yard. I looked at the roof of my house. I looked at the massive oak tree that shaded my lot. And then I looked at her sunken patio, which sat about 4 feet lower than the grade of my backyard. A plan didn't just form. It assembled itself instantly, complete with blueprints and citations. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who just realized he holds a royal flush in a game of poker against a bluffing toddler. Total containment, I repeated. That's right, she snapped. Not a drop across the line. Or else. You want me to ensure that all water originating from my property stays on my property until it is properly discharged? I asked, clarifying the terms. Yes, finally you understand English. And you're going to be watching? I asked. Like a hawk, Jack. Like a hawk. Okay, I said. I dropped the hose completely. Officer Miller, you heard her. She wants strict adherence to property line water containment. I am officially on notice. Miller looked at me, confused by my sudden capitulation. Jack, you don't have to— No, I interrupted. She's right. Good fences make good neighbors, right? I need to respect her boundaries. I looked Mrs. Higgins dead in the eye. I promise you, Mrs. Higgins, I will fix my drainage. I will make sure that the water flows exactly where it's legally supposed to go. You won't see another drop on your driveway from my truck. I'm going to renovate my entire drainage system, just for you. Mrs. Higgins puffed up her chest, sensing victory. She thought she had cowed me. She thought she had won the dominance hierarchy of the cul-de-sac. Good, she sniffed. See that you do. I'll be watching. She spun around and marched back to her house, her bathrobe flapping in the wind like a conqueror's cape. Officer Miller watched her go, then turned back to me, sir. Jack, seriously, just don't wash the truck for a week. Let her cool down. Oh, I'm not worried about the truck. Officer, I said, watching Mrs. Higgins' front door slam shut. She brought up a good point about drainage. My gutters are old. They spill over sometimes. If I'm going to be compliant, I need to upgrade. Miller squinted at me. He's a good cop. He has good instincts. He saw something in my face that made him nervous. Jack, what are you going to do? Just following the rules, officer, I said cheerfully. She wants the water on my side? She's going to get the water on my side, all of it. Miller shook his head, sighed, and walked back to his cruiser. Don't make me come back here, Jack. You won't have to, I muttered as he drove away. But the fire department might need to bring a pump. I walked into my garage and grabbed my tape measure. I didn't finish washing the truck. I had a much bigger project to plan. The sky was blue, the sun was shining, and I had just been given a mandate to weaponize gravity. Mrs. Higgins wanted my water? Oh, she was going to get it. She was going to get every single drop. The following Monday was deceptively quiet. I spent the weekend doing calculations. I walked the perimeter of my property with a laser level, looking like a surveyor who had lost his mind. I sketched diagrams on graph paper. I looked up the average rainfall for our county, 42 inches a year, with heavy concentrations in late summer. I looked up the roof square footage of my house, 2,800 square feet. Do you know how much water a 2,800 square foot roof collects during a 1-inch rainstorm? It's about 1,700 gallons. 1,700 gallons of water. That's not a puddle. That's a swimming pool. And currently that water was dispersed through 4 downspouts at the 4 corners of my house, gently splashing onto splash blocks and dissipating into the lawn. It was inefficient. It was democratic. It spread the load. But Mrs. Higgins didn't believe in democracy. She believed in autocracy, and she had demanded I change the flow. On Tuesday, the first shot was fired. I arrived home from work to find a certified letter taped to my front door. It wasn't mailed. It was hand-delivered. I opened it in the kitchen. It was on thick, bonded paper that felt expensive. The letterhead read, Law Office of Stephen Higgins, Paralegal Services. I laughed out loud. Stephen was her nephew. He wasn't a lawyer. He was a paralegal who worked for a personal injury firm downtown. but the letter was formatted to look terrifying. Dear Mr. Miller, continued trespass and water damage via negligent drainage. This letter serves as a formal cease and desist regarding the water runoff from your property located at 402 Oak Lane. My client, Mrs. Patricia Higgins, has documented repeated instances of your liquid waste crossing the property boundary. This constitutes a nuisance, a trespass, and a potential health hazard. We demand that you immediately rectify the grading of your driveway and/or the positioning of your water discharge systems to ensure zero crossover of fluid onto Mrs. Higgins's parcel. Failure to comply will result in immediate litigation seeking damages for soil erosion and emotional distress. Govern yourself accordingly. Signed, Stephen Higgins. Govern yourself accordingly, I read aloud. Okay, Steve, I will. But she wasn't done. Underneath the letter was a bright orange envelope. This one was real. It was from the City Code Enforcement Department. I opened it. A notice of violation. Complaint received. 0605-202X. Nature of complaint. Improper drainage affecting neighboring property. Description. Resident reports downspout on north sides of dwelling directs water toward property line, causing pooling on adjacent lot. I walked outside to the north side of my house, the side facing Mrs. Higgins. Sure enough, there was a downspout there. It had been there since the house was built in 1995. It pointed generally away from the house, which meant it pointed somewhat toward her yard. It was 10 feet from the property line. But physics is physics. As I stood there looking at the offending aluminum pipe, a white city truck pulled up. A guy in a high-vis vest hopped out. He looked like he'd walked through 3 construction sites already that day. His boots were muddy, and he held a tablet. "Jack Miller?" he asked. "That's me," I said. "I'm Dave, Code Enforcement," he said, shaking my hand. He looked at the orange sticker in my hand. "I see you got the love letter." "I did," I said. "Mrs. Higgins?" Dave rolled his eyes so hard I thought he'd pull a muscle. "We have a folder on her, Jack, a thick one. But I gotta do my job. She sent us photos. Technically, looking at this," he pointed to the downspout. "She's got a point. Current code says you can't have a point source discharge aimed directly at a neighbor if it's within 10 feet of the line. You're right at 10 feet, maybe 9.5. This house was built 30 years ago, I argued. Isn't it grandfathered? Usually, yes, Dave said. But once a complaint is filed about nuisance water, the city attorney gets nervous. They don't want to be liable if her foundation cracks and she blames us for not enforcing the current code. So the grandfather clause gets thrown out the window. He tapped on his tablet. "Look, Jack, I don't want to fine you. I really don't. But you have to abate the nuisance." "Define abate," I said. "You need to change the discharge point," Dave explained. "You need to move this downspout or redirect it so the water is released on your property, stays on your property, and flows to a natural drainage easement or the street." I looked at the ground. My side yard was flat. But my backyard... "Dave," I said, pointing to the back corner of my house, "if I capped this downspout here and ran a gutter extension all the way to the back corner of the house and discharged it there, would that be legal?" Dave looked. "The back corner? Let's take a look." We walked to the backyard. Now, this is where the geography gets important. My backyard is shaped like a shallow bowl, but the lip of the bowl on my side is higher. My land slopes sharply downward toward the back fence, and right on the other side of that fence is Mrs. Higgins's English garden. A sunken patio area she had dug out 5 years ago without a permit, I checked. Because her patio is sunken, It sits about 2 feet below the natural grade of my lawn. If I discharge the water here, I said, standing about 5 feet from the back fence on my side. It's well within my property. It's not pointed at her house, it's pointed at the ground. Natural gravity takes over from there. Dave looked at the slope. He looked at her patio. He looked back at me. A slow grin spread across his face. Technically, Dave said, dragging out the word. Technically, as long as the pipe ends 5 feet from the property line, you are compliant. Once the water hits the ground, it's surface runoff. You can't be held responsible for the direction of surface runoff caused by natural topography. And if that natural topography happens to lead directly into a certain sunken patio? I asked innocently. Dave chuckled. Then that sounds like a civil matter regarding her lack of a retaining wall. The city wouldn't care. You'd be code compliant. So if I move all my drainage to this spot, I confirmed, I satisfy the citation? You would, Dave said. He typed something into his tablet. I'll give you 30 days to rectify the drainage issue. You notify me when it's done, I come inspect the pipe placement, and I close the case. It'll be done in 2 weeks, I promised. Good luck, Jack, Dave said. I hope you have flood insurance. Or rather, I hope she does. As Dave drove away, I saw the blinds twitch in Mrs. Higgins' kitchen window. She was watching. She probably thought the inspector was handing me a fine. She probably thought I was being scolded. I walked over to the fence. She came out the back door, smugness radiating off her like heat waves. Well, she called out, did he tell you to fix your mess? He did, Mrs. Higgins, I shouted back, putting on my best defeated neighbor voice. He said you were absolutely right. I have to move the water discharge. I have to ensure total containment away from the driveway. Excellent, she preened. See? Rules are there for a reason, Jack. I expect that downspout gone by the weekend. Oh, it'll be gone, I assured her. I'm going to do a whole new system. I'm going to make sure the water goes exactly where nature intends it to go. Just keep it off my driveway, she yelled. You have my word, I said. Not a drop on the driveway. I went inside and picked up the phone. I didn't look for a handyman. I looked for a specialist. I looked for Big Mike. Big Mike was a contractor I'd used for my deck. He was 6'4", wide as a refrigerator, and had a beard that could hide a small badger. He drove a beat-up Ford F-350 that sounded like a dying tank, and he hated 2 things in this world: cheap lumber and homeowners associations. I dialed his number. Mike's Construction, he grunted. Mike, it's Jack Miller. I have a job for you. Deck repair? No, I said. Spite gutters. There was a pause on the line. Then I heard a lighter flick and a deep inhale. Jack, Mike said, his voice dropping to a reverent whisper. Tell me everything. I explained the situation. I explained the pressure theft. I explained the police. I explained the code enforcement. And then I explained the topography. I need you to reroute the entire roof, I said. All of it. I want to cap the front downspouts. I want to run 6-inch commercial gutters, the big boys, along the eaves, and funnel every square inch of rain collection to a single discharge point at the southwest corner of the lot. The southwest corner, Mike mused. That's the low point? That's the point directly above her sunken patio, I said. Jack, Mike said, that's evil. She threatened to sue me for washing my truck, Mike. I can be there Thursday, Mike said. I'll bring the big ladder. And Jack? Yeah? We're gonna use the galvanized steel. Make it look industrial. She'll hate the aesthetic. You're an artist, Mike. The plan was in motion. The trap was set. Now all we needed was a little bit of rain. And according to the Weather Channel, the Gulf Coast was brewing something nasty that was heading straight for us. Thursday morning rolled around, and true to his word, Big Mike arrived at 7 o'clock a.m. sharp. You could hear him coming from 3 blocks away. His truck, a monstrosity of rusted steel and faded bumper stickers that said things like, "I brake for lumber" and "My other ride is your mom," rumbled down the quiet suburban street like a tectonic event. He backed into my driveway, the reverse alarm beeping loudly enough to wake the dead, or worse, the retired. Beep, beep, beep. I stood on the porch with 2 mugs of coffee. As Mike killed the engine, the silence that rushed back into the neighborhood was heavy. I saw the curtain in Mrs. Higgins' living room snap shut. She was already watching. Mike hopped out. He was wearing Carhartt overalls that had seen more wars than a history textbook and a t-shirt that was more whole than fabric. He adjusted his trucker hat, spat on the ground, my ground, so it was fine, and grinned. "Smells like victory," Mike rumbled, accepting the coffee. "And fresh mulch." "She remulched yesterday," I noted, "to celebrate her win over the water thief." Mike took a sip of the coffee, grimaced. He likes it black. I put sugar in it, force of habit, and looked up at my roof. "All right, boss, let's look at the canvas." We spent the next hour doing a forensic analysis of my roofline. Mike set up his ladder, a 40-footer that looked like siege equipment, and scrambled up, like a squirrel on meth. I stayed on the ground, holding the clipboard. "You got standard 5-inch aluminum up here," Mike yelled down, his voice echoing off the houses. "Clogged to hell with oak leaves. No wonder you had spillover." "Can we upgrade?" I yelled back. "Upgrade? Jack, we're going nuclear." Mike slid down the ladder, landing with a thud that shook the pavement. He wiped his hands on a rag. "Here's the plan. We rip all this residential tin foil off. We install 6-inch commercial K-style gutters. Seamless. Steel. Not aluminum. Steel." "Why steel?" "Because it sounds louder when the rain hits it," Mike winked. "And because it holds more volume. We want velocity, Jack. We want mass." He walked me around to the side of the house, the forbidden zone, where the current downspout was offending Mrs. Higgins. "So she hates this one," Mike said, kicking the aluminum tube. "Despises it. Says it violates her sovereign borders." "Right. So we cap this corner. We cap the front corner. We pitch the entire gutter run, 60 feet of it, backwards." He walked to the back corner of the house. "2 here." We stood at the precipice. My backyard sloped down toward the fence. Beyond the fence was the sunken patio, currently filled with wicker furniture and those outdoor pillows that cost $50 each and aren't actually comfortable. Mike did some mental math, looking at the sky, then the roof, then the ground. "Okay," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "If we bring 2 6-inch downspouts together right here into a collector box and run a 4-inch PVC pipe underground just 5 feet, we can pop it up right there." He pointed to a spot of grass about 6 feet from the fence. "Is that legal?" I asked. "Underground burial?" "Totally," Mike said. "It's actually preferred. It's erosion control. We pop it up with a heavy-duty emitter. The water comes out of the pipe, hits the emitter, spreads out onto your grass, and then—" he gestured with his hand, mimicking a flowing river. "Gravity takes the wheel. And the grade is a solid 10% drop straight into her petunias," Mike confirmed. "Jack, if we get an inch of rain, you're going to be dumping roughly 1,000 gallons of water right here in about 20 minutes. It'll be like a fire hose." "Let's go get the permit," I said. We drove to City Hall in Mike's truck. The cab smelled of sawdust, old French fries, and unbridled masculinity. We walked into the building department. The clerk, a woman named Brenda, who had seen it all, looked at our application. "Gutter replacement and minor drainage alteration," she read. She looked at Mike. "You digging trenches, Mike?" "Just a little scratch in the dirt, Brenda," Mike smiled. "Burying a downspout extension, keeping it 5 feet off the line. Strictly code." Brenda looked at the plot map we had drawn. She saw the arrow indicating flow direction. She looked at the adjacent lot. She knew Mrs. Higgins. Everyone at City Hall knew Mrs. Higgins. Mrs. Higgins had once filed a Freedom of Information Act request to find out how much Brenda spent on office supplies. Brenda looked at the map. Then she looked at me. A tiny, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. "Make sure you use Schedule 40 PVC," she said, stamping the paper with a heavy thud. "We don't want it crushing under the weight of the soil." "Yes, ma'am," I said. "And make sure the emitter is clear of debris," she added, handing me the permit. "We wouldn't want the water backing up." "I'll keep it pristine," I promised. We walked out of City Hall with the golden ticket, a permit, a legal document authorized by the government of the United States, well, the municipal equivalent, that gave me permission to build the hydro cannon. "She can't touch us now," Mike said, patting the dashboard. "We are agents of the state." We stopped at the supply house on the way back. Mike didn't buy the stuff off the shelf at Home Depot. He went to the contractor supply yard. We bought 20-foot lengths of galvanized steel gutter. We bought massive brackets. We bought a collector head, a box that looks like something you'd see on a factory in the 1920s, to join the downspouts. And we bought the pipe. 4-inch rigid PVC. "This isn't a drainage system," Mike said as we loaded the truck. "This is an aqueduct." When we got back to the house, Mrs. Higgins was waiting. She wasn't on my property, but she was hovering at the line, inspecting my grass for defects. "I see you're back," she called out as we unloaded the steel. "Is that metal?" "Steel, ma'am," Mike bellowed cheerfully. "Top of the line." "It looks industrial," she sniffed. "This is a residential neighborhood, not a warehouse district. I hope you checked the HOA guidelines on aesthetics." "We did," I lied. I actually had. The HOA only specified color, not material. As long as I painted them to match the trim, I could use titanium if I wanted. "It's going to be painted white." "And the discharge?" she demanded. "I don't see any pipes going to the street." "Oh, we're doing an underground dispersion system," I said, using big words to confuse her. "It releases the water into the subturf layer for maximum absorption." "As long as it doesn't cross the driveway," she warned. "Ma'am, I guarantee you," Mike said, grunting as he lifted a bundle of pipe, "this water will never see your driveway. It's going the complete opposite direction." She smiled. "Good. Finally, some accountability." She walked back inside, satisfied. She thought she had won. She thought the underground dispersion meant the water would magically disappear into the center of the earth. She didn't understand that soil has a saturation point. She didn't understand that clay, which our soil was mostly made of, absorbs water about as well as a raincoat. Mike watched her go. "She has no idea, does she?" "None," I said. "I almost feel bad," Mike said. He paused, then laughed. "No, I don't. Grab the shovel." The construction took 3 days. 3 days of banging, drilling, and swearing. Big Mike didn't work quietly. He believed that construction was a performance art. He blasted 80s hair metal from a job site radio that was covered in plaster. "Pour Some Sugar on Me" became the anthem of the project. Mrs. Higgins called the police on the second day for a noise disturbance. Officer Miller showed up again. It's 2:00 p.m. on a Wednesday, Mrs. Higgins, Miller said, standing in her driveway while Mike stood on the roof playing air guitar with a caulking gun. He has a permit. Construction is allowed between 7:00 a.m. and 6:00 p.m. But the vulgarity of the music, she complained. And the clanging. He's installing the gutters you asked for, Miller pointed out. You wanted the water moved. Moving water takes pipes. Pipes are made of metal. Metal clangs. I wanted him to fix that, not turn his house into a factory. He's complying, ma'am. Let him finish. Miller gave me a wave and left. Mrs. Higgins glared at Mike. Mike blew her a kiss. It was beautiful. By Friday afternoon, the system was done. It was aggressive. That's the only word for it. The new gutters were massive. They wrapped around the house like a steel exoskeleton, and the pièce de résistance was the back corner. 2 massive downspouts converged into the collector box, which looked like a funnel. From the box, a single thick pipe ran down the wall, disappeared into the ground, and ran under the sod for about 15 feet. It popped up near the fence, capped with a green pop-up emitter. It looked like a small landmine sitting in the grass. All right, Mike said, wiping sweat from his forehead. Let's test it with the hose. No, I said, stopping him. No tests. You don't want to check for leaks? I trust your work, Mike, I said. And besides, look at the forecast. I pulled up the weather app on my phone. A massive blob of green, yellow, and angry red was swirling in the Gulf of Mexico. The National Weather Service had issued a flash flood watch for the entire county starting Saturday evening. Tropical depression? Mike asked. Remnants of one, I said. Expected rainfall, 3 to 5 inches over 24 hours. Mike let out a low whistle. 3 inches? Jack, that's over 5,000 gallons of water. That pipe is going to be pressurized. Will it hold? Oh, it'll hold, Mike grinned. I glued those PVC joints with the good stuff. That water is going to come out of that emitter like a geyser. We paid Mike. He shook my hand, his grip crushing my metacarpals. Call me if you need a deck built next year, or a bunker. I might need a lawyer first, I joked. Nah, Mike said, climbing into his truck. You got the permit. You're bulletproof. Enjoy the show. He drove off, leaving me alone with my new weapon system. Friday night was calm. The air was thick and humid, that heavy, sticky stillness that comes before a summer storm. The crickets were loud. I sat on my back porch, looking at the English garden next door. Mrs. Higgins had left her patio furniture uncovered. She had her little solar lights twinkling along the pathway. It looked nice. It really did. It was a shame about the geography. I saw her come out around 9:00 p.m. She walked to the fence and peered over. I raised my beer in a silent toast. It's quiet, she said, suspicious. Is he done? All done, Mrs. Higgins, I called out. Total containment system installed. Passed inspection this afternoon. And the driveway? Dry as a bone. Good, she said. Let's hope it stays that way. Oh, it will, I promised. The driveway is safe. She went inside. I checked my phone again. The radar showed the leading edge of the storm hitting around 4:00 p.m. Saturday. I went to bed, but I slept fitfully. It was the anticipation. It was the feeling a kid gets on Christmas Eve, if Santa Claus was bringing a deluge instead of toys. Saturday morning started gray. The sky was the color of bruised slate. The wind was picking up, whipping the trees back and forth. I went out and did my final prep. I moved my grill under the covered patio. I brought my dog, Buster, inside. I set up a camera. Yes, I'm petty. I set up a GoPro in my kitchen window, angled perfectly to capture the backyard and the fence line. I told myself it was for liability purposes, to prove the water was coming from the emitter and not some illegal hose. But deep down, I knew I wanted the footage. At 3:00 p.m., the first drops fell. Big, fat, heavy drops that splattered against the pavement. Plip, plop. Then the sky opened up. It wasn't just rain. It was a sheet of water. It was the kind of rain where you can't see the house across the street. The sound was deafening, a roar of white noise. And on the roof? Mike was right. The steel gutters rang. It sounded like a drum line practicing on a tin roof. Ting, 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 whoosh. I stood by the back sliding glass door, coffee in hand, watching. For the first 10 minutes, nothing happened. The ground absorbed the initial soak. The grass got wet. The emitter stayed closed. Then, the volume caught up. 1,700 gallons per inch of rain. We were getting an inch an hour. I saw the green cap of the pop-up emitter twitch. The pressure was building in the underground pipe. The water was rushing down the oversized downspouts, swirling into the collector box, shooting through the PVC and hitting the end of the line. Pop. The green cap lifted. A stream of water, clear and forceful, bubbled out. It wasn't a trickle. It was a fountain. It surged out of the ground, fanning out across the grass just 5 feet from the fence. It hit the saturated soil and, finding no place to go down, decided to go sideways. It flowed toward the fence. It slipped under the wooden slats. I moved to the window to get a better angle. Mrs. Higgins' patio was constructed of pavers, brick stones set in sand. Sand washes away easily. The water poured over the lip of the retaining wall she hadn't built high enough. It cascaded onto her patio like a miniature Niagara Falls. At first, it just pooled around the wicker chairs. Then, it began to rise. The sunken design of her patio, which she always bragged was cozy and intimate, was now acting as a retention pond. The water had nowhere to go. Her drain, a tiny 4-inch grate in the center of the patio, was instantly overwhelmed. It was probably clogged with petunia petals anyway. The water level rose. 1 inch, 2 inches. It reached the bottom of her sliding glass door. I took a sip of coffee. "Steady," I whispered. The rain intensified. The wind howled. The stream from my emitter was now a steady, gushing torrent. It looked like a fire hydrant had burst, and it was all perfectly legal surface runoff. Then, the lights in Mrs. Higgins' house flickered. I saw movement. The back door flew open, or tried to. Mrs. Higgins attempted to slide her glass door open, but the water pressure against the bottom track made it stick. She shoved it. It gave way. Splash. Water didn't just go out, water went in. The level on the patio was higher than her floor. She screamed. I couldn't hear it over the storm, but I saw her face. It was the face of a woman realizing that physics does not care about her HOA status. She splashed out onto the patio in her rain boots, holding a broom. She started sweeping the water. She was trying to sweep the water uphill. She was trying to sweep away the ocean. She looked at the fence. She saw the torrent coming from under the slats. She realized where it was coming from. She dropped the broom. She ran back inside. 3 minutes later, my phone rang. Unknown number. I didn't answer. It rang again. I didn't answer. Then I saw the blue lights. Officer Miller. In a hurricane. I sighed, put down my coffee, and put on my rain jacket. It was showtime. I walked out the front door. The rain was stinging my face. Officer Miller was sprinting from his car to my porch, huddled under a raincoat. He reached the shelter of my porch, dripping wet. He looked furious. Not at me, specifically, just at the situation. "Jack," he shouted over the wind. "She says you're flooding her house. She says you pointed a hose at her living room." "I'm not doing anything," I shouted back, holding up my hands. "I'm drinking coffee. It's the rain, Miller." "She's hysterical. She says she has 3 inches of water in her den. She says it's coming from your yard." "Let's go look," I said. We walked, waded, really, around the side of the house to the backyard. The scene was catastrophic. My yard was soggy, yes, but because of the slope, it wasn't flooding. The water was moving. It was moving efficiently, beautifully, right toward the low point, Mrs. Higgins's yard was a lake. Her patio was gone. The water was up to the seat cushions of her wicker furniture. And yes, it was definitely pouring into her window wells. Mrs. Higgins was banging on her back window, pointing at us. She saw Officer Miller and frantically pointed at the ground near the fence. Miller looked at my emitter. He saw the water gushing out. "Jack," Miller yelled, "that pipe, it's dumping right onto her." "It's 5 feet from the line, officer," I yelled back, pulling the laminated permit out of my jacket pocket. I had laminated it. I was prepared. "Code compliant, Section 44B, surface runoff." Miller looked at the pipe. He looked at the fence. He looked at the permit. It's legal?" he asked, wiping rain from his eyes. "The city inspector signed off on it Tuesday," I shouted. "She demanded I move the water away from the driveway. This is the only other place it can go. Gravity, officer. I can't arrest gravity." Just then, the city, Inspector Dave, pulled up. Apparently, Mrs. Higgins had called everyone. Dave ran into the backyard. He took one look at the setup. He looked at the emitter bubbling away. He looked at Mrs. Higgins's aquarium of a patio. He didn't look angry. He looked like he was trying very, very hard not to laugh. Mrs. Higgins opened her window. Bad move. More water got in. And screamed, "Arrest him! Make him turn it off!" "Turn it off," I yelled. "It's the roof, Mrs. Higgins. Unless you want me to stop the rain, I can't turn it off." "Dave," Miller shouted, "is this legal?" Dave looked at the placement. He paced it off, roughly. 5 feet, Dave shouted. "Discharge is on his property. Once it hits the ground, it's God's water." "God's water?" Mrs. Higgins shrieked. "It's Satan's water! Look at my basement!" "Ma'am," Dave yelled back, "you have a sunken patio with inadequate drainage. You changed the grade of your lot when you dug that out. You don't have a retaining wall. This is a civil engineering failure on your part." "I demand you plug his pipe," she screamed. "If I plug the pipe, it backs up into his foundation," Dave countered. "He has a right to drain his roof. You told him to move it from the side. He moved it." Mrs. Higgins stood there, water swirling around her ankles inside her own home, realizing the trap she had walked into. She had demanded the water be moved. She had demanded strict adherence to property lines. She got exactly what she asked for. I looked at Officer Miller. He just shook his head. "I'm writing it up as a weather event," he said. "Civil dispute. No crime here." "Thanks, officer," I said. We went back inside. The storm raged for another 6 hours. The aftermath was expensive. For her. The water receded the next day, leaving behind a layer of silt, mud, and despair on her patio. Her basement carpet was ruined. Her drywall was soaked 2 feet up. Her wicker furniture was molding. On Monday, her insurance adjuster arrived. He was a small, serious man with a clipboard. I happened to be gardening near the fence when he was inspecting the damage. "Neighbor?" the adjuster asked, looking at me. "Hi there," I said. "She claims you pumped water into her house," the adjuster said. "False," I said. "I rerouted my gutters per city code. Here's the permit. Here's the video of her demanding I move the water away from the driveway. And here's a copy of the city code regarding natural surface runoff." I handed him a folder. I had prepared a dossier. The adjuster flipped through it. He looked at the video on my phone. I texted it to him. He watched Mrs. Higgins scream, "I want total containment! Keep your water to yourself!" The adjuster smiled. It was the cold, shark-like smile of a man who just found a reason to deny a claim. "So," the adjuster said, "the insured demanded an alteration to the drainage flow, knowing her property sits at a lower grade, and failed to install adequate retaining measures or sump pumps." "That sounds about right," I said. "Also, that patio wasn't permitted. Check the city records. No drainage inspection." The adjuster's eyes lit up. "Unpermitted addition caused the flooding? Interesting." He tipped his hat. "Have a nice day, sir." "You too." Mrs. Higgins' claim was denied. Self-inflicted damage due to unpermitted landscaping and failure to mitigate known drainage risks. That was the phrase they used. She had to pay for the mold remediation out of pocket. It cost her about $15,000. She never came out to yell at me again. In fact, she planted a row of tall, dense hedges along the fence line. I think she wanted privacy, or maybe she just wanted a barrier for the next storm. Big Mike came back a month later to build me a new deck. We sat on the finished wood, drinking beers, looking at the hedges. "You know," Mike said, looking at the innocent little green pop-up emitter in the grass, "we could have aimed that a little more to the left. Mr. House." "We could have," I agreed, taking a sip. "But she wanted precision." "She sure did," Mike laughed. I looked at the sky. A few clouds were gathering. "Looks like rain," I said. Somewhere behind the hedges, I heard a door slam and the sound of a shop vac turning on. "Music to my ears," I said. And I went inside to make a sandwich, leaving the nature to take its course. Because in the suburbs, you don't fight fire with fire. You fight water with water, and you let gravity do the dirty work.